What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by the channel. Today's project is this Echo Edger, and the problem is that I was told that it only needed a fuel grommet and a tune-up to get it to run. Let's take a good look at it, find out what's wrong with it, and hopefully we can fix it. In this video, we try and repair this Edger. However, it may not be the exact repair you need to make to yours. We'll explore other options later in the video. You can never really believe what a seller says when you buy a piece of equipment from them. Most of the time, they don't know what the problem is either, they just want it gone. That means it's up to you to figure out how to fix it. This Echo Edger is in very good condition, so there's a good chance that it's worth fixing. However, it might look great because it was damaged early in its lifetime and then put away until they decide to do something about it. If we take a look around, we can see that the primer bulb was replaced at some point, so why didn't they complete the repair? Now hopefully the carburetor was also cleaned and serviced at the same time. The fuel grommet is definitely missing like the seller said, so that needs to be replaced as well. Now when it was picked up, the seller did put some fuel in the carburetor throat and got it to run for a few seconds, so we do know that it does work. The first thing I want to do is take the fuel tank off the engine. The grommet can be difficult to put in, so with the fuel tank off the engine, it'll be a little bit easier. We'll start by removing the recoil assembly. The fuel lines are still flexible but not brand new, and since we're replacing the tank grommet, we'll go ahead and replace the fuel lines as well. This is an example of what a grommet looks like that was taken from another machine. The longer line goes to a fuel filter and the other line is a return line. The last line is a vent for the tank. Now we're not going to use this used part, instead we're going to buy a new one since they aren't very expensive. It even came with a new fuel filter as well. The only thing that it didn't come with is the tank vent, so we'll take the one off the old one and put it on the new one. After the vent was pushed into one of the new fuel lines, we can now install the lines and the grommet. The problem is that the grommet has to seal tightly against the tank, so it's a bit larger than the hole in the tank. If it's not tight, then it might leak fuel from the top of the fuel tank. We're going to use some WD-40 to help squeeze it into the hole, and I'll let you know that it was very tough to do this, so take your time. Once it's in, let's reinstall the tank back onto the engine. The port on the left side of the carburetor is the return line, so that means that the port on the right is the one that needs the fuel line with the fuel filter on it. If you mix these up, the engine might run, but the carburetor will get clogged up from drawing in unfiltered fuel. Once the tank has been installed, we can now replace the recoil assembly and the top cover on the engine. Another reason why your Edger could be leaking fuel is if the top part of the tank has a crack. I wouldn't try repairing it, instead I suggest replacing it if the parts are available. Now there's just a little too much fuel line outside of the fuel tank, so I'll just pull some of it back inside the tank. Now, once everything is back together, let's put some fuel into the tank and try priming the fuel system. Now, if your primer bulb does not fill up with fuel, then it's very unlikely that the engine will start. If this is the case, you'll need to inspect the carburetor for a problem. Now look inside the fuel tank and make sure that the bubbles are not coming from the fuel filter. They should be coming from the return line like ours is doing. That means that the fuel lines are connected correctly to the carburetor. And of course, since the fuel is actually returning back to the tank, that means our primer bulb is filled with fuel like it's supposed to. Now, if your bulb is dark in color, consider changing it. They are very inexpensive and easy to change. Now that it's primed, let's try starting it and see how it runs. So it starts, but it won't stay running. And before I try adjusting the carburetor, I want to inspect the carburetor for a hardened diaphragm or another problem. Removing the carburetor is pretty simple. Just remove the 2 screws and disconnect the fuel lines and the throttle cable. Don't lose this gasket that goes between the carburetor and the engine, otherwise you'll have some running issues. In fact, we might want to consider replacing this one later on once we get it working. So the metering diaphragm is in perfect condition, which is not what I expected considering how it was acting. Let's also check the other side of the carburetor for any problems. So the tiny little screen in the upper left side of the carburetor is not clogged either. So the carburetor should be delivering the correct amount of fuel to the engine. So now I'm wondering if we just need to adjust the carburetor instead. So there's only one thing that keeps me from removing the caps to the hidden adjustment screws, and that's the way the engine sounds. This engine sounds very different from the other Echos I've worked on. Let's put the carburetor back together and back on the engine and try starting it up again so you can hear the difference. After it runs for a little bit and dies, I then want to show you a clip of a different engine, and I want you to hear the difference between the two of them. I'm not sure if you can hear the difference, but the running echo sounds very healthy, whereas this edger sounds a little weak. What we're going to do now is test the compression on the engine using this compression tester. You can get one from an auto parts store or ask a friendly mechanic to borrow one. And unfortunately, the initial reading is quite low, so it's best if we try the test again, but more than likely it'll be pretty much the same as before. Just as before, the number is about 30 psi, which is just too low for the engine to work properly. I'm actually quite surprised that it even started at all. For me, 50 psi is the borderline between running well and running poorly. Ideally, the higher the reading, the stronger the engine is, but I've never tested a new engine before, and when I do, I'll let you know. So unfortunately, this engine is going to need a rebuild, but I have a better idea for its future, other than scrap parts, that is. So my question is, what would you do with this worn-out engine? Would you throw it away in the trash, give it away to someone who could do something with it, or would you fix it? I know what I'm going to do, but I'm more curious about your answer. Thank you for watching. I really appreciate your time. Please feel free to ask any questions, and I hope to see you in my next video.